看다시 있겠니?
In our headlines on this Monday afternoon, June 24th, here on the Korean Peninsula. Russian data reportedly verifies shipments of some 1.6 million artillery shells from North Korea to Russia for use against Ukraine over the course of 6 months starting last August. And a trilateral multi-domain exercise is supposed to take place among South Korea, Japan and the US, as agreed during the defense talks on the sidelines of a security forum in Singapore this month. Meanwhile, more than 1,300 people lost their lives during this year's Hajj, according to Saudi Arabia's health ministry, and most of them were unauthorized pilgrims who tracked through excruciating heat waves. An American daily says internal Russian data shows that Moscow secured some 1.6 million artillery shells from Pyongyang in the course of 6 months. Our foreign affairs correspondent KPMG has details.
From August to January, more than 74,000 metric tons of material labeled as explosives were distributed from 2 ports in Russia's Far East to 16 sites mainly along the country's western borders near Ukraine, an amount equal to about 1.6 million artillery shells. Citing a new analysis of trade data obtained by C4ADS, a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., the Washington Post reported that although the data does not include the origin of the shipments, there is evidence of Russian ship movements between North Korea and Russia during the same period. According to the C4ADS, although documents refer to the cargo as explosives, paperwork at the arrival site indicates that they were, in fact, munitions. Similar patterns were also detected by the Royal United Services Institute, a British think tank that uses satellite imagery to monitor movements between North Korea and Russia. It found 27 shipments between the North Korean port of Dajin and the 2 Russian ports in roughly the same period, estimating that thousands of containers had been moved. Addressing concerns on military cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow, South Korea's National Security Advisor Chang Ho-jin said Russia's provision of precision weapons to North Korea would leave no line for Seoul's aid to Ukraine. He emphasized that South Korea's decision on whether to provide weapons to Ukraine depends on Russia, apparently hinting that Seoul would consider delivering lethal weapons to Kyiv if Russia crosses the line. Meanwhile, Russia accused Ukraine of drone and missile attacks in a city in Russian-occupied Crimea. Russian authorities claimed Sunday that at least 3 people were killed, including 2 children, and over 100 were wounded. It said the deadly attack launched by Ukraine involved 5 U.S.-made long-range ATACMS missiles. This comes after the Biden administration in May gave Ukraine permission to use American weapons to strike targets inside Russia. KPMG Arirang News.
A multi-domain exercise is poised to take place among South Korea, Japan and the US as agreed during top-level defense talks on the sidelines of an annual security forum in Singapore earlier this month. Our correspondent Kim Jung-sil reports.
A nuclear-powered U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, arrived in Busan over the weekend ahead of a 3-way military exercise between South Korea, the U.S. and Japan. The Freedom Edge exercise aims to strengthen military training against North Korean provocations.
Freedom Edge is a significant exercise because it is an opportunity to practice and cooperate between the United States, Korea, and Japan. With the Theodore Roosevelt, which is one of the most advanced versions of a U.S. aircraft carrier, the trilateral nations will be able to exercise all the aspects of multi-domain operations.
The Freedom Edge exercise features simultaneous drills in surface, underwater, aerial, and cyber warfare. This week's exercise was announced when the defense chiefs of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan met in Singapore earlier this month. The exercise comes as the North's leader Kim Jong-un gained confidence after a one-on-one meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin last week. And on top of that, the signing of a pact that pledges mutual defense assistance in the event of war. Experts say it's possible Pyongyang would react strongly to the exercise.
North Korea has stipulated that any type of joint military exercise between South Korea and the US is a war practice drill, so it's likely the North would respond strongly to the upcoming drills. Pyongyang would also observe US strategic assets and possibly react strongly to that.
North Korea, meanwhile, is expected to hold a key meeting of its ruling Workers' Party this week to discuss follow-up measures to implement the partnership agreement with Russia. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in the Middle East, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has shared prospects of shifting some military personnel to Israel's northern border with Lebanon to fight the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. In an interview with a local television network this past Sunday, he claimed the intense part of the armed confrontation with Hamas in Gaza is coming to a close, allowing Israeli troops a chance to better focus on the Hezbollah, whose members have been threatening attacks against key Israeli infrastructure. Netanyahu added hopes that a full-scale war with Hezbollah will be averted, but pledged nonetheless that Israel is prepared to, quote, fight on several fronts. And staying in the region, more than 1,300 people lost their lives during this year's Hajj, according to Saudi Arabia's health ministry. And most of them were unauthorized pilgrims who trekked through excruciating heat waves. Our Lee-Sing-jae reports.
The Hajj is an annual Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca, the holiest city for Muslims located in Saudi Arabia. The pilgrimage is a mandatory religious duty that must be carried out by all adult Muslims at least once in their lifetime who are physically and financially capable of making the trip. However, this year's Hajj, which ran from June 14th to 19th, turned deadly as Saudi Arabia says over 1,300 people died during the 6-day pilgrimage period this year. Releasing the official figures for the first time, the government said Sunday that 1,301 pilgrims died, mostly due to heat stress. Temperatures above 51 degrees Celsius were recorded during this period, with many people walking long distances under direct sunlight without adequate shelter or comfort. Of the dead, 83% were not authorized to make the pilgrimage. Saudi Arabia requires licenses to legally access Mecca, with 1.8 million issued each year. As licenses can cost several thousand US, many make unauthorized pilgrimages. Those without proper documents don't travel in organized tour buses with air conditioning or easy access to water and food supplies. The permits are allocated to countries on a quota system and are distributed through a lottery. Lee Sing-jae, Arirang News.
The income tax deduction rate for the use of credit cards at traditional markets will be raised. The rate, which currently stands at 40%, will be raised to 80% as part of efforts to encourage foot traffic to traditional markets. Also, Seoul's Ministry of SMEs and Startups will seek to revise a regulation to allow for broader use of Onnuri gift certificates. Under the revision, these certificates may be used at all franchises except establishments classified as entertainment to better support small businesses. In fact, come July, the government will share a comprehensive support framework for small business owners. And Korea's LG Electronics has topped TV ratings and reviews by US-based Consumer Reports. 4 out of 8 Best TVs of the Year awards were granted to LG OLED TVs. The awards took into account a range of factors, including picture quality, sound experience, as well as security. Among the top-performing TVs, the LG OLED EBO clinched 87 points, the highest score secured by any evaluated TV. And the second leg of the country's high-speed commuter rail service begins its operation this coming Saturday. The ultimate goal is to bring a number of cities in Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces within commuting range of capitals Seoul. Our Lee Soo-jin has more.
The next stop on Seoul's high-speed commuter line is set to open by the end of this month. The Transportation Ministry announced that the GTX-A line will be stopping at Gusong Station starting June 29. It's the next station to open on the GTX-A line following the opening of Suseol in southern Seoul and Seongnam and Dongtan in the neighboring Gyeonggi-do province in March this year. And they're all part of the South Korean government's plan to make it faster for people to commute to their jobs in Seoul. People who get on at Gusong Station will now be able to reach the city in around 15 minutes compared to the 36 minutes on the existing Suin-Bundang line. And it'll cost only 3,950 won, or around $3. As for the rest of the line, the northern section is scheduled to open in the second half of the year, followed by the connection between Seoul Station and Suseol in 2026, and finally the stop at Samsung Station, one of the nation's most used subway stations, in 2028. The government is also hoping that the opening of this station will boost the ridership of the GTX-A line, which is currently lower than expected.
Passengers can transfer from the Suin-Bundang line, which is expected to raise ridership, and it's a station that represents Yongin City.
And ahead of the opening of the new stop on the line, the government also carried out radiation inspections in a move to mitigate concerns about extra electrical substations being built to supply electricity for the GTX lines. According to an official, radiation below the World Health Organization's guidance level of 83.3 microtesla doesn't have any health risks.
The level of radiation detected from the substations just 3 meters away was not only under the WHO's guidance level, but also lower than what's emitted from hairdryers and microwaves.
The tests that were carried out in the electrical substation came to around 2.7 microtesla and on ground level around 0.04 microtesla. With the opening of more stations like this on the GTX-A line scheduled in the coming months, more people will be able to enjoy faster and safer accessibility to the city. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
In other news, some local governments here are taking it upon themselves to play Cupid in hopes of encouraging couples to start a family. Our Kim Bo-kyung files this report.
A demographic national emergency. Those are the words President Yoon Suk-yeol used recently to describe South Korea's low birth rate crisis. Despite the government's astronomical budget to tackle the low birth rate, the total fertility rate, the average number of expected births from a woman in her lifetime, dropped to an all-time low of 0.72 in 2023. Along with the central government's efforts to encourage people to start families, local governments too are making all-out efforts, coming up with their own ways of addressing the birth rate in their regions. One of them is Seongnam City, whose own mayor has become a matchmaker. Dubbed Solomon's Choice, a mass blind date program is being hosted by the city's government to help young people meet each other in a more natural way.
Even if young people are even considering marrying, they are too busy working and cannot actively seek chances to go out to find love. The local government's way of selecting people to join the program is fair and trustworthy, so a lot of participants seem to have trust in us.
The matchmaking program that started last year has already helped to make more than 100 couples, with one of the couples set to get married. That couple was introduced through the program in November last year and will become newlyweds in July. The groom-to-be had no hesitations about recommending the program to others.
On a one-on-one blind date, there is pressure on the guy to lead the conversation. But here, all participants arrive with the intention of actively seeking a match, so they all actively speak. Also, even if you are not into one, you can talk to another person right away, so there are more chances.
Though forming such an atmosphere for people to find love and marry might seem like a limited measure to beat the demographic crisis, an expert says it is necessary.
Against population crisis, local governments have been desperate in hosting additional and new population recently. And there are several ways to do that. First, hosting new public organizations. Second, hosting private companies. And third, promoting marriage. One common reason for not getting married will be not finding a suitable partner.
Once you find your destiny, you need to marry, which is, again, not simple. According to Statistics Korea, people in their 20s and 30s said not having enough money was the top reason for not marrying. Most of the pressure comes from buying a house, but the money needed for a wedding is also a burden. Private matchmaking company Hee-young says the average cost for a wedding preparation, excluding a house, is around $45,000. What's worse is that businesses associated with weddings, including wedding halls and dress and makeup shops, do not have set prices, nor do they clearly disclose costs, making it even harder for uninformed couples. Seoul City's solution was opening public facilities for couples to use for weddings to lessen their burden.
This beautiful hanok is actually a complex cultural space promoting Oriental medicine. But it was transformed into a wedding hall for the day so a couple could have a cost-effective wedding.
Mr. Park and his bride chose this venue through the city's public wedding hall program, which is opening up a total of 28 venues for weddings. The program began during the pandemic as wedding halls closed their doors and wedding hall rental prices surged. The biggest advantage of renting public facilities is that they are cheap comparatively, and prices are transparent.
Many people choose usual wedding halls. We wanted to have a memorable, meaningful event for guests, so we chose this venue through the program. We were able to check the price transparently because they showed us the estimate and contract in detail.
Seoul City aims to expand the program, making it much cheaper for couples.
Couples prefer outdoor weddings, especially in a hanok, followed by parks and museums. We're going to have more of these venues so that more couples can easily make a reservation. In terms of the cost, the rental fee goes up to $860, but we have revised the related ordinance to make it free, starting later this year.
Such measures are seemingly better than nothing at all. However, an expert added that what was of the utmost importance was to tackle core issues.
The most important necessities for young people who want to marry is to have a house, jobs, and the money needed to raise children. Local governments need to come up with detailed benefits such as houses specially allocated for newlyweds, so that they can plan their life, marry, and have a child.
Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in sports news, Korean golfer Yang Hee-young clinched her first major victory at the KPMG Women's PGA Championship this past Sunday. She shot an even par 72 on the final day at Sahali Country Club in Sammamish, Washington to seal the tournament by 3 strokes. Yang takes home over $1.5 million in prize money and also a spot at the upcoming Paris Summer Olympics. The 34-year-old made her debut on the LPGA Tour back in the year 2008. The Korean-German Chamber of Commerce and Industry believes middle powers like South Korea and Germany can work together to navigate the turbulent waters of current geopolitical tensions and protectionist trade measures. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young covers his remarks.
South Korea and Germany can de-risk from global crises through stronger value-based partnerships and innovation. That's according to Dr. Martin Henkelmann, president of the Korean-German Chamber of Commerce and Industry. At a time when trade protectionism, war and geopolitical conflicts challenge the rules-based global order, he said middle powers like Korea and Germany need to strengthen their solidarity to keep markets free and open. This came as German Vice-Chancellor Robert Habeck visited Seoul last week, before heading to China, where he called out Beijing for its unfair subsidies and support for Russia amid its invasion of Ukraine. Following China, South Korea is Germany's second-largest Asian market, with bilateral trade standing at $33.9 billion last year, according to Korea Customs Service. Henkelman says de-risking from China presents untapped potential for growth between the two export-dependent economies.
Besides the aspect that both countries are highly industrialized, have a strong GDP that comes from industry, from manufacturing, we are value partners, as we always say. And I think it has been very good sign that Korea has been supporting many of the sanctions in this sanction against Russia. I think de-risking means that we look for opportunities to diversify our sourcing, what we spoke about, that we look on opportunities to have different options for the production.
With overlapping interests in fields like supply chain security, semiconductors, automobiles, and renewable energy, the two energy-intensive economies can collaborate on decarbonisation and innovation across all sectors.
I think offshore wind would be a good possibility here. German turbines and German knowledge, how we could establish wind parks, combining this with the skills and the knowledge here in the country when it comes to the steelwork, etc., could be a good fit then to go forward for renewable energy. And in other fields, we see that when it comes to quantum physics and when we look on AI, these are all challenges we have together. Our industry has to see how they integrate AI into modern processes of manufacturing and what are the next steps here.
To spur cooperation, Henkelman says German firms in Korea hope to see more clarity and stability in defining legal terms, especially labour laws, as well as better access to public procurement and certifications for green businesses. He further called for an update to the South Korea-European Union FTA, as Korea and Germany compete and collaborate towards a complementary partnership that reinforces global value chains. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. We begin today in Russia's North Caucasus Republic of Dagestan, where attacks by gunmen on two churches, a synagogue, and police officers left at least 13 dead and another 25 injured. The attacks were reported simultaneously on Sunday in the cities of Derbent and Makhachkala, where the synagogue and churches were also reportedly set ablaze. According to the Dagestan Public Monitoring Commission, 7 law enforcement officers, a priest and a church security guard were killed, while Russian news agency TASS reported that 4 armed militants have also been killed. The head of the Dagestan Republic said that identities of the attackers are being established while urging the public to remain calm. Dagestan, one of the more impoverished parts of Russia, is predominantly Muslim and has previously suffered attacks by a jihadist organization called the Islamic Emirate of the Caucasus. Moving over to Greece, where 13 crew members of a luxury yacht have been charged with arson after fireworks from the yacht allegedly sparked a forest fire on the Greek island of Hydra. According to Greek media, they were charged on Sunday with causing the fire on Friday night. According to the country's Minister of Climate Crisis and Civil Protection, the fire burned some 3,000 acres of Hydra Island's pine forest. 6 airplanes and 2 teams of firefighters were required to extinguish the blaze. The 53-meter super yacht reportedly costs around $320,000 a week to hire. Protesters in Brazil marched in Rio de Janeiro on Sunday to demonstrate against stricter laws criminalizing abortion in Brazil. The bill, proposed by conservative lawmakers, would make it illegal to terminate a pregnancy after 22 weeks, labeling the action homicide, punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Demonstrators included carnival groups and women dressed in white bonnets and red cloaks, representing characters from The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood's dystopian novel set in a patriarchal theocracy. The bill needs to be passed by Brazil's lower house, although no date has been set yet. Currently, abortion in Brazil is only legal in cases of rape or if there is a clear risk to the mother's life, with the punishment of up to 3 years in prison for illegal abortions. Kim Hee-young, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Today we have rain in the forecast for southern parts of the country, dropping 10 to 20 millimeters an hour of heavy rain in the late afternoon, along with thunder and lightning. Meanwhile, yellow dust, which is usually seen during spring, could blow into the western parts of the country today. So those in southwestern regions, that's including Gwangju, need to brace for yellow dust rain. The capital area had cloudy skies to start off the new week after yesterday's sudden downpours. But skies are getting sunnier and the heat wave takes a break with a high of 28 degrees Celsius here in the capital. Southern provinces should have highs that are similar to slightly higher than yesterday, topping out at 31 degrees in Daegu. Well, temperatures don't look too bad, but muggy air will make it feel uncomfortable. It will get hotter again as we get into the second half of the week, while monsoon rain returns to certain parts of the country on Wednesday. With that in mind, let's take a look at the international weather conditions. Right, and those are the headlines at this hour. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Do stay with us.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? Welcome. 시간 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Presiding over Monday's cabinet meeting following his latest diplomatic agenda in New York, President South Korea's economy will grow. The central bank has kept its key interest rate unchanged.
mission complete for rocket booty South Korea. Seoul is rallying in hopes of bringing the world expo 2030. Arirang.
Adventure. Play now. Recording to playback. Everything you need in video production. New software at no additional charge with unlimited upgrades. Creativity I want. Easily with Gum Easy Pass. Get now for $2.99. Russia hopes to establish a, quote, reliable security architecture in the Asia-Pacific region. This is according to its leader Vladimir Putin during last week's state visits to Vietnam and to North Korea, where he penned a defense pact with Kim Jong-un. So what are the broader implications of this military agreement? What are the prospects of South Korea providing Ukraine with lethal weapons? And what has been the response to Moscow's courting of Hanoi? Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching Issues and Insiders for this Monday, June 24th. I'm Min San-hee. Today we touch upon Russian leader Vladimir Putin's visits to North Korea and Vietnam last week. And for this, I have our panel of foreign correspondents. I have Thomas Maresca with the American news agency United Press International. Thomas, welcome back.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me.
I also have Frank Smith, a freelance foreign journalist based here in Korea, who is also, I understand, lecturing at Yonsei University. Frank, it's good to have you with us.
Nice to be back again, Sunny.
Right, Thomas, let's start with details about the defense deal sealed between North Korea and Russia and its broader implications.
Yep, so North Korea and Russia signed a new treaty on comprehensive strategic partnership during Putin's visit to Pyongyang last week. And, you know, the article that got just probably the most attention, and I think caught a lot of people by surprise, actually, was this, you know, defense clause in it that said, you know, if one country is attacked, the other would come to their military aid sort of without delay. And, you know, I think right now the world is trying to sort out what exactly that entails. I mean, there seems to be some sort of wiggle room about, you know, that also mentions under Article 51 of the UN Charter and the laws of each country. So it's not necessarily, you know, saying, oh, there's, you know, there will be definite automatic response if, you know, there's shots fired in the DMZ or something like that. But I think, you know, at the very least, it sort of indicates that, you know, on the one hand, North Korea, it sort of sets the stage for North Korea to continue and perhaps expand its, you know, weapons supplies to Russia for its war in the Ukraine. I mean, when Putin was asked, he was in Vietnam after North Korea and asked by some Russian journalists about whether sort of Western-supplied weapons being used by Ukraine against Russia would be considered an act of aggression. He didn't say, like, definitely yes, but sort of said, yeah, we're looking at that. It seems quite close. So he just sort of seemed to set the table for that as a pretext. And then he also, in the same breath, kind of mentioned that Russia would very much consider selling weapons or supplying North Korea with weapons under the same sort of umbrella, which has, clearly caused a good deal of alarm in this side of the world. We've known for a while that, it seems that Russia would be trading maybe military technology or sort of space technology to North Korea to advance its own, weapons and missile programs. This seemed to kind of make that a bit more explicit as a possibility. And, I think also it just kind of lays out that, both sides are going all in on this sort of agreement. For a while there was this sense of, oh, it's a, just sort of convenience for both sides. But it seems like, they both have fully invested in this idea of us against the world. I mean, there's language in this partnership too about, sort of the unilateral sanctions regime imposed by the hegemonic West, and we're sort of striking back against that. So, you can see that seems to be more of a strategic, maybe long-term alliance than, or, not necessarily alliance, but, some sort of arrangement. I think it sort of also underscores how desperate, in a way, Putin is, or how limited his options are. I mean, he hasn't been to North Korea since 2000 until now, so it gives you an idea of how important, he thought it was until then. But along with that desperation, I think there's a sense of real danger afoot, between both of these. Both of these countries are so isolated and in some senses have less to lose, that there's also, I think, this heightens the sense of perhaps danger.
Right, and keeping in mind what Thomas has just said, Frank, how worried do you suppose should the international community be about this military pact between North Korea and Russia?
I think the international community, in a sense, we're talking about the U.S. and its allies in Europe and its allies here in East Asia and around the world. And there's hardly consensus over what that might be. When you look at the UN Security Council, you have two countries, China and Russia, that we wouldn't consider the international community in terms of concern here, but certainly the U.S. and its allies should be worried about this, and especially Article 4 that Thomas alluded to, that suggested that they would come to each other's aid with whatever means in case the other country was in a state of war. Now, the Korean War ended with an armistice, not a peace treaty. Russia is a nuclear power with thousands of nuclear weapons, with whatever means. Does that mean that Russia has potentially or could potentially extend the nuclear umbrella, extended deterrence to North Korea, the same extended deterrence, the nuclear umbrella that the U.S. extends to South Korea? Does this mean that now Kim Jong-un has Russia's nuclear weapon to serve as cover for his provocative behavior, for example, along the DMZ that we've seen over the past few months? NK News, analyzing satellite imagery of the military demarcation line, the actual border within the DMZ, indicated that North Korea had crossed that line repeatedly to develop better anti-tank barriers, and we're destroying what had previously been railways between North Korea and South Korea, restructuring its defensive positions again within that disputed area. North Korean soldiers were even killed by mines that exploded there. Just a reminder, this is the largest mined area, hundreds of thousands of landmines along this area that, again, North Korea feels it has carte blanche cover to go in there and essentially move the border further south, it appears. This could have huge ramifications. Prior to this security pact, and I think it's fair to call it an alliance at this point, in South Korean state media, it said that they did not anticipate there being an alliance aspect to any of the documents that the two of them may sign. So this essentially alliance agreement has really taken the so-called international community, the U.S. and its allies here in South Korea and Japan, by surprise. And certainly analysts within government and outside of government are struggling really to analyze all of this. Just today, for example, in the Korea Herald, I read an article that suggested now, Kim Jong-un has not only has cover to engage in more provocative behavior towards South Korea, but that Putin would welcome that kind of behavior because it would distract the U.S. and Europe perhaps from what's going on in Ukraine. The ramifications of this treaty can be very, very far-reaching. And I think analysts, again, inside and outside of government around the world are going to have to take some time to really digest all of this.
Right. And speaking about Ukraine, Thomas, South Korea, in response to the pledge of greater partnership, military partnership between North Korea and Russia, South Korea has signaled a potential shift in its support policy for Ukraine. What do you believe are the prospects of South Korea shipping weapons to Ukraine?
Right. Well, the National Security Advisor Chang Ho-jin mentioned that in the aftermath of the Putin-Kim summit that he condemned the partnership, but he mentioned that South Korea planned to review its policy of providing lethal aid to Ukraine, and up until now, Seoul has avoided directly supplying lethal aid, under this kind of blanket policy of not supplying weapons to countries at war. And, it's something that just in general, I think the idea, we even saw it, it kind of came out in those leaked documents, last year among internal discussions. But, we know that Seoul has been hesitant to sort of fully commit to supplying weapons directly for fear of, just burning bridges with Russia or further, provoking Russia. South Korea is in a particular position in the world where obviously, you have a lot of factors to consider just geographically and size and everything wise. We know that South Korea has shipped ammunition to the U.S. that, kind of maybe it was replenishing the stockpiles from the U.S. sending, and South Korea has sent weapons to Poland that, found their way to the battlefield. But, this would be really a firm step that South Korea has been hesitant to take until now. I don't think they're going to do it tomorrow. The way it was sort of framed has been it would be in response to what Russia does. If Russia starts heavily arming North Korea, you could make a credible case for why. But, I think South Korea still is having to weigh these kind of costs and benefits of taking such an action. One side of it is, you would want as much security guarantee from the U.S. as possible if you were going to sort of fully jump on board with that. And, I think the looming election in November kind of creates a sort of a sense of uncertainty about what to expect maybe going forward. If there is a change in administration, how is that going to affect, the U.S. policy towards Ukraine? And, I've already seen questions arising again, the sense of should South Korea be looking to develop its own nuclear arsenal? How much can South Korea really rely on the U.S. in these cases? I would say at the same time, the calculation also is if South Korea's providing weapons could be seen as really tipping the balance one way on the battlefield, where a case where it's not just sort of helping Ukraine hold things off, but, Ukraine winning the war or something. That's a strategic interest probably to South Korea in terms of its own security, benefits of Putin taking that defeat and how that might spill over to North Korea. So I think, there's a lot that, a lot of steps that have to take place before we see it. But it does feel like it's more on the table and out there than it had been until now.
Right. In the meantime, Frank, Russia's Vladimir Putin has said that South Korea's provision of weapons, lethal weapons that is, to Ukraine would be a very big mistake. What actions might Putin resort to in the case of weapons shipments from South Korea to Ukraine, do you think?
Well, just before I get to that, I'd like to spin off of what some things that Thomas mentioned. South Korea's provision of lethal aid to Ukraine, again, is certainly something that Putin is going to look at very negatively. And it would be easy for Putin and for Russia to determine that kind of aid. It would see it on the battlefield. It might have, satellite surveillance of these transfers take place. Whereas Russia's cooperation with North Korea in terms of what Putin might give North Korea through this alliance and through North Korea's provision of lethal aid to Russia for its use in Ukraine is probably going to be a little bit more difficult to pinpoint. It will involve, for example, satellite technology and missile technology. Just 9 months ago, Kim Jong-un held a summit in Russia's Far East with Putin. He visited the Vostochny Cosmodrome, where he learned more about Russia's missile technology. Intelligence sources suggest that there is cooperation in terms of the manufacture of engine technology for their missiles, as well as, possibly satellite technology. And then on the nuclear end of things, in terms of energy, powering, for example, North Korean submarines, that enables North Korean submarines to move more freely without being surveilled that easily. That could have ramifications for South Korea and the United States. And then nuclear energy, just domestic nuclear energy cooperation between Russia and North Korea would be problematic, because that's how North Korea obtains fissile material for its nuclear weapons program. And then just on the conventional weapons sphere and the physical weapons sphere, there could be increased cooperation from Russia to North Korea, and even on the nuclear technology sphere. So the range of areas that Russia can help North Korea in terms of its security situation, its security circumstances, its military hardware, its weapons, is quite broad and certainly worrisome for the U.S. and its allies.
Right. Thomas, following his trip to North Korea last Wednesday, Putin made his way to Vietnam. What are the broader implications, you suppose, of Moscow's courting, so to speak, of Hanoi, do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting trip. I mean, I think on the one hand, it was just a chance for Putin to kind of get out of his international isolation. There's not that many places he can actually go these days. The International Criminal Court has a warrant out for him, and Vietnam is one country that's not party to that. Vietnam and Russia have a very long and sort of very close history. I mean, I think Russia is certainly in the Soviet days and the post-Vietnam War, even during the war with the French by Vietnam, Russia was Vietnam's biggest supporter, biggest patron, and there's a long and kind of fond history. I mean, a lot of Russian or Vietnamese leaders studied in Russia during the time, so there's a kind of a closeness there. And there were a bunch of agreements signed during the trip, but nothing as meaningful, I think, as this defense pact. Russia and Vietnam certainly have some still mutual interests. I mean, Russia has been traditionally Vietnam's largest weapons supplier. I mean, Vietnam is not supposed to be buying more weapons from Russia these days, but a huge part of their arsenal comes from Russia, so they kind of still need to maintain that relationship. Vietnam and Russia have joint ventures in oil and gas exploration that is important to both. I mean, I think for Vietnam, maybe having Russia as a bit of a wedge against China in the South China Sea, where there are territorial disputes over their oil exploration, is something that's helpful to them. But for Vietnam, it's often called this bamboo diplomacy. They have this stance towards we'll bend with, we'll work with everybody and kind of bend but not break in terms of our relationships. And Vietnam has greatly strengthened its ties with the U.S. Just within the last year, they raised the level of their partnership. Vietnam has deep, economic ties and other ties with China as well. So, it's something for them to try and navigate. I mean, and obviously the importance of the amount of trade that Vietnam has with the U.S. and with China massively dwarfs what amount of trade they have with Russia. And I think the U.S. was clearly not super happy about just sort of the way Vietnam rolled out the red carpet for Putin. I mean, the embassy there spoke against it. I mean, Washington didn't say too much about it, but then really the day after Putin was there, the U.S. sent Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Crittenbrink there, and they made a statement, both sides, about how important this relationship was. I think, again, it probably, to some extent, it underscores how narrow Putin's world really is. Like, these are the places he can go, and these are, I mean, he obviously does still want to maintain a sort of, as you mentioned at the top, some security alliance within Asia or some security presence here. But, we can see Putin doesn't have that many places to go. I think for Vietnam, it may underscore how things go, and they may have to take more of a stand, maybe one way or the other in the future. Or is it possible to maintain this kind of three-way fence sitting or multilateral fence sitting indefinitely? So I think it has ended up raising some questions for what Vietnam may have to confront going forward as well.
Right. And broadly speaking then, Frank, what has been the international community's response to Putin's engagement with his counterparts in Pyongyang and Hanoi?
Well, again, spinning back to what Thomas said, I think we can sort of set the Hanoi visit aside and concentrate really on the reaction of Putin's visit to Pyongyang. And it was pretty much negative all the way around, the U.S. and its allies, with the U.S. and South Korea coming out with a statement today condemning this developing alliance. Also, you had the United Nations Security Council, or the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, saying that Russia should abide by United Nations Security Council sanctions. Now, those sanctions suggest that countries should not help North Korea with military trade. Doing so is violating United Nations Security Council sanctions, which Russia signed on to. I think really this has to be a wake-up call for the U.S. and its allies in the international community about a number of issues. One of them, the UN Security Council itself. I hold a UN Security Council emergency mock session at Yonsei Graduate School each year, and the students choose the subject. And this year it was, okay, we can talk about the war in Gaza, we can talk about the war in Ukraine, and then students suggested, let's talk about reforming the UN Security Council because it's not functioning. And I think that was the case here, and we can dial this back to blatant violations of international law that the United States has engaged in, going back to the Iraq War and currently, the way the UN Security Council is functioning vis-a-vis Israel's war and arguably genocide on the Palestinians. When that is let slide, or when the UN Security Council fails to act in that regard, Russia's behavior in Ukraine or North Korea's alliance with Russia, you're going to have more difficulty there. And then if we dial things back further to 2018, 2019, Moon Jae-in laid engagement with North Korea on a silver platter for former U.S. President Donald Trump. And in 2019, at the behest of his national security advisor, John Bolton, he, gave that up and really sabotaged the potential to engage North Korea, be it perhaps a flawed arms agreement or a flawed peace treaty with North Korea. If that had happened then, if there was some type of engagement between or locked-in agreement between North Korea and the U.S. and the international community, we probably wouldn't be where we are now. So really, we have to view this as a wake-up call for the international community.
Well, for sure, the defense deal between North Korea and Russia, the latest one, is raising quite a bit of concern here. And as you mentioned earlier, Frank, analysts are still trying to assess what the implications of that deal may be. For today, though, that's where we'll have to end this talk. Frank, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Thomas here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching.